Good evening, friends, Realmies, countrymen, and welcome to Storyteller Soul Care with our very special guest, creativity coach and author, Allen Arnold. Tonight's live stream is free to anyone who wishes to watch on our brand new YouTube channel. Yet those Realm Sphere members who are subscribed to a premium group, Prime or above, you get exclusive access tonight and can join via the Zoom link provided. If you're a Realm Sphere member at the Prime level or above, and you're watching on YouTube, I would invite you to find the event listing that says member link. So just kind of, I'll show you here. Go into the Realm Sphere. Just type in not sure what just happened. Type in community.realmmakers.com, go to events, and click on the link that says Storyteller Soul Care Members Link. That will bring you in to where you can get on the Zoom meeting. And you will be able to answer the poll questions, chat. We do ask you to keep your audio muted during the course of the live stream until you have a question and we bring you on. Now, before we get too far along, I want to address what some of you may be wondering. If you've joined us on the live stream before, you might notice we're not using Crowdcast. That is a platform we've been using since we launched the live stream. We call it the Realm Stream in 2020 when everything went virtual. And quite frankly, we think this will be a more stable and reliable way to live stream. As we approach our annual conference, we are experimenting with how we can improve our live streaming capabilities heading into 2022. Our upcoming events, big events coming up. Allen Arnold is, of course, he's teaching today's webinar, but if you want to bring Allen on here, we have our Winter Creativity Summit coming up February 20th to the 23rd in Colorado Springs. We're going to be in person and live streaming the entire event from Colorado Springs. So we are really looking forward to seeing you, Allen. And Allen, welcome.
Thank you.
Storyteller Soul Care.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here tonight, and we're going to talk about soul care for you specifically as a storyteller in a bit. But first, I just want to invite you personally to join us for the Winter Creativity Summit. What we're doing tonight is a taste, it's a glimpse, it's a bit of what we're going to dive into in person. And when we're in person, we're going to look at ways to restore your heart. It's very different than a typical writers conference where it's all about craft, all about the business of publishing. We're going to go into some of those things, but the foundation we're going to lay is how do you care for your own soul as a storyteller and let this be something that's restorative, that's actually increasing your imagination and your creativity because you can breathe and you can understand and discover ways to stay wholehearted as you create. And as you do, your stories become more authentic, have more power, and have an eternal spark. So we're going to go into detail on what does that look like? And then we're going to have some interactive conversation. We're going to have some exercises that will show you how to live in this. And we're going to talk about the publishing industry and trends with the light on of how do we maximize that by understanding our true voice and how to make the greatest impact as writers in today's publishing world.
Now, some of you might have participated last year in Allen Arnold's winter retreat. It was called Unleash Your Story, and it was fantastic. We had I think it was around 90 people attending online. It was 100% online, of course. Right. Last year. And like we did last year, one thing we're doing again this year is we've got a whole kit of gifts for everyone who participates in person. It's included in your registration. And if you're attending online, it's optional. You can go in and buy the gift package, which is about $60 worth of stuff that we're just charging $40 for. And everything is specifically relevant to the content of what we're going to be going through during the conference or during the Creativity Summit. So it is something that you will probably miss not getting if you don't choose to get that.
The gift packet, Scott, before we started tonight, I was kind of chomping at the bit to reveal what's in it just because it's that cool. And we want to keep it a surprise and we're not going to reveal, but I mean, we spent a lot of time planning what these items were, and you're going to smile. You're going to like these. These are things that are going to be unexpected joy bombs on your creativity. And they're going to be reminders even after the conference of how to stay in the message. So last year, we did vials from the Story of With that were handmade and custom and very cool. This year, we've got some totally new things that I think are going to just make your heart come alive, and can't wait for you to see them, but that's to come.
I have some of them right here. I'm just not showing you because you have to order them before you need to ship them. So it's kind of fun. So now we are I want to tell everybody who's on the Zoom meeting. Now, keep in mind, some of you are on YouTube and we love you and you guys can watch, but there are some things that we're going to mention for the folks that are in our paid subscription premium groups. You guys are in Zoom and you have a poll option. Go to the bottom of the Zoom page and click on the polls. We've got a couple questions for you. Which best describes your current state, and not where you're living, but your state of mind right now? We're asking which best describes your state. And the next poll question is, what would be most helpful? And there are a bunch of options. So please check out those polls and answer those questions so that when it comes time to talk about the results, we actually have that information populating. So head down.
Scott, can you tell people where some are asking where the polls are, how to find the polls?
Well, if they're in Zoom and they've got a small window, they might have like 3 little dots and it says more. So click on more and then it'll show you polls.
So they're saying they don't have access. Can you see if there's some way you can give them access?
Oh, and I click on polls, I see them. And I think I need to click launch. I just hit launch. So both questions are now launched. So there we go. I launched the polls. See, we're new, but I think this is amazing. I'm really pleased with how this will work. So those of you who are here, and we've got about 38 people here in the Zoom meeting. So please go to the polls and start answering those. We'll stop talking about the polls, but you can start answering those. Now, Alan, I think we're ready to start Storyteller Soul Care.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.
You got it.
So everyone, first, I want to thank you for spending time on a Friday night to talk about soul care for a storyteller. You are the rare bohemians who I love to spend time with and who take it seriously, and your stories will be the better for it. But more than that, you will be the better for it. And so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to walk you through some practical ways to take care of your soul as a storyteller. And why is that important? Let's start there. Why is this even important? Well, I'm a big believer that no great art was ever created without great heart. What I mean by that is, if a creator is numb, weary, stressed out, burnout, distracted, those creators are not going to give birth to great stories because they are in the way of the story. Actually, they are unable. It's like asking somebody who is weary and exhausted to run a marathon. It's just not going to happen. They'll try. It's not that there's no effort, but you're not in the right place to give birth to something that has an eternal spark. So that's why it's important, because we want our art, our stories to have great heart, right? So we're going to look at that. And yet we live in a world that drains us. We don't live in Eden. We don't live in paradise. We face challenges every day to get through the day that are draining, that can be diminishing, that can dishearten us, that can distract us. And so then when we try to create our own world, well, a lot of times we don't have much in the tank. We're empty, and running on empty is not a great way to run into a story, to tell a really powerful story. So we're going to look at the survey results. As soon as they're ready, Scott's going to come on and tell us where you guys are, because I think it's important for us, one, not to feel alone if we're feeling a little bit empty, if we're wishing that we had more energy or weren't stuck. So we're going to tell you the results in just a second of the group, so you can kind of get a feel for where the group's at tonight. But in the meantime, I want to just name, there's a really deep connection between imagination and restoration. And I don't hear a lot of talk about this, but I've done a lot of research on it. And actually, our imagination is far more vibrant, is far more alive and creative when we practice restoration. And the reason why, I think it goes all the way back to Genesis, it goes all the way back to the beginning. And so, I like to talk a lot about God and creativity, not just creativity, but how does God come into creativity as our creator, and what does he invite us into? Well, let's look at Genesis for a second and God's role as creator in that, and look at that in terms of what we can take away for ourselves. So Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. The cool thing about this is the very first words of scripture, God introduces himself as creator. He doesn't introduce himself as dictator or as overlord or as, master who you will bow down to. He introduces himself as a creator, creative. And so immediately, that's the first sense of God that we get. And he doesn't just say, I'm creative, he creates and invites us to watch him in creation. And so I think that's one of the coolest things about all of scripture, is how it begins with God saying, in essence, yeah, I want you to know me as a very creative God, as a creator. Now, watch what I do. And he invites us into that, right? And Genesis 1:2, the Spirit hovers over the empty void. A lot of times when we go to create, we probably feel like there's an empty void within us, in our hearts, in our brain. We're just cluttered in our thinking. It's a little bit chaotic, a little bit foggy. We feel like we don't maybe have that much to give. We're just trying to show up and hope something happens. Well, in Genesis 1:2, God enters into the empty void. And then Genesis 1:3, he starts creating. And what we see when he starts creating is a couple of things throughout the days of creation. First, he speaks. He speaks creation into being. But here's the thing I want us to realize. Before he speaks something into being, this isn't said explicitly in scripture, but you have to realize he imagines it. He thinks it. Like, in other words, God just doesn't randomly speak a word. He actually sees in his mind and thinks and imagines what he wants. So he imagines ocean before there is ocean, or light, sun, or humans, or animals, or whatever it is. He imagines it first. So God imagines something that's never been, and then he speaks it. And the cool thing about speaking it is it's his voice. And so God isn't just, it's not just, don't think of it as just speaking a word, but every author has a unique voice. Every writer that we love has a unique way of saying something based on who they are and based on how they view life and their humor and their wit and their articulation and style. Do they, fill paragraphs up on the page, or do they say a lot in 4 or 5 words? How do they convey the message? Well, God speaks into existence, things into existence. He uses his voice, unique voice, which we all need to master, right? And then he sees that it's good, scripture says. And when it says he sees that it's good, to me, that is a real seeing in the sense of knowing. Like some people see us when we enter the room and they go, oh yeah, there's, whoever, there's Amy, there's Paul, there's John. They see us, but seeing and knowing are 2 different things. They may not know us deep ways. They may not know us in real true ways. But when God sees what he created, he knows it intimately and he says it's good. And then on the 7th day, rest is what the scripture says. God rest. But actually, I think an equally fair way to say that, in a way that would be more true even perhaps, is he savors it. He sees everything each day when he creates it. And in the end, he rests, he savors it, he enjoys it, he celebrates it. So when we think about those 4 things, imagining something, then speaking it in our unique voice when we write it, then seeing that it's good, knowing it for what it really is, and then resting and savoring it, those are 4 powerful things. And tonight we're going to mainly be looking at the resting and the savoring, but the first 3 parts lead up to that, right? Like you have to have an imagination that's vibrant and a heart that's alive to even begin the creative process. And then you have to have a voice that is your unique voice to speak things into existence. And then you need the ability to see in a true way, not just words on a page, but see and know your story and know that it's good. And then how do you rest and restore? And when you do that, the cycle continues. And that's what leads then to the next creation that starts with a rested imagination. So imagination and restoration go together in some really cool ways. And again, we see that in the beginning, in Genesis 1. Now, what happens when we don't take time to fully restore? What happens when we don't care for our soul? Well, I'm just going to name a few what I call false comforters really quick. Write these down, and you may identify with all, or you may identify with 1 or 2 more. But these are things that happen when we don't care for our soul as a creative and as a storyteller. Here are some danger things you don't want to happen, but things we often rely on. Okay. One of the false comforters, when we're not taking care of our soul, that kind of is a substitute, is we keep trying to stay really busy. We're trying to stay in a hyper state of busyness because we believe the lie that doing more is somehow being more. So we're always trying to stay busy. We think there's, if we only do this, if we try this, if we spend money on this promotion, if we drum up more people on our social media account, if we make connections in this, if we keep talking about our book in certain ways, it's always more, more, more. So staying overly busy is not overly kind to your soul. So that's one way. A second way is we start to measure the wrong things. Now, what are some examples of that? Well, we try to measure our worth or success or traction on things like word count. Now, just today, I was talking to somebody who really got a little irritated at me because word count was their sacred cow. Like that was their thing that they did not want me to push into. And so we had a really interesting conversation about how word count's not bad. It just doesn't measure creativity. You can write a lot of words and have very little creativity. You can have a big word count and not big ideas. Word count, no reader wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder how many words my favorite author wrote. They don't measure in volume, they measure in the quality of the story. So I'm not saying word count's bad. I'm saying when we get overly exhausted and stressed and we're trying to measure things, word count is not a good measure of how our soul is doing. If I ask you how you're doing and how you're taking care of your soul, and you tell me, well, I wrote 1,000 words today, you haven't really told me anything. I don't know any more than if I said, I went to Hawaii and you said, how was the vacation? And I said, well, I walked 1,000 steps today. What does that have to do with the quality of the vacation? So we start to measure the wrong thing, or we start to measure, how many reviews we had on Amazon, or we start to measure if anybody is interested in our manuscript, or we start to compare. Those are unhealthy things that actually damage the soul when we put our worth and focus on measuring things. So that's the second thing. The third thing is putting pressure on your story, your writing, to validate you. See, a story was never meant to carry that weight. The story you're writing is not your, talisman, magic charm, validator of you. And when we look to stories to validate us as writers, we're putting a pressure on the story that it was never meant to carry. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is we start to look for relief in the wrong ways. See, what we need, remember, is restoration, but relief is a cheap substitute. So we start to look for relief sometimes when we're exhausted. And what are some of the ways? Well, we binge on Netflix. For days, for weekend, we start eating a tub of ice cream. We start drinking too much alcohol. We find other addictions that we know are not healthy for our soul, but are trying to be a form of relief because we're stressed, we're weary, and it's like turning to junk food when what you really need is solid food. You get the sugar high, you get the rush, but ultimately you're more empty than when you started. So a question on that one is, where do you turn for relief when what you really need is restoration from God? And there are a myriad of ways we look for things that relieve us. And rarely is that relief what we truly need. What we need is to be whole again, restoration of the soul. And then the last one I'm going to name right now, that's a symptom or a sign of false comforters that actually drain the soul, is this: formula. When we're worn out, we start writing by formula. We find things that have worked in the past, and that becomes our trick bag. So what worked in the past, we try to duplicate. We try to do a little bit more of the same thing and hope to get the same results. If you look at some of your favorite authors, or maybe some of the most popular authors, and think about this, there are many that I know I've quit reading after 4 or 5 books. Maybe you have too, because you go, I'm kind of reading the same story over and over again. Like the first time it was really good. The second time it felt a little similar, different names, different characters, but kind of the same. And by the third, fourth, fifth, it's predictable. It's routine, it's boring. And so we tend to look for formula when we are stressed and our imagination is tired and our heart is numb. We try to coast on formula when we really need restoration. So I just want to name those 6 or 5 things. And you may identify with one, like I said, more than others, but you want to go, where am I turning to false comforters that don't restore my soul, but that feel good momentarily, or that seem to be life, a small L instead of capital L, life. And I need to reduce those and look for more true restoration. But I want to name the false ones first. Scott, before I go into specific practices for soul care, do you have the survey results?
Yeah. Yep. We've got some great results. You had some good options because every option had some people choosing it. So for the question, of which best describes your current state. We have a couple rock stars who said they are at their creative peak.
Okay.
So it's really good to see some folks knowing and having some confidence in where they're at. We have a couple people who chose they're on the verge of giving up or are stuck in the status quo. That's just a couple folks here on the Zoom. A few more people decided they answered that they're doubting their story and ideas. About 4 folks, and another 4 people they're feeling in a fog, but not sure why.
Okay.
Now we're getting to the last 2. So the number two most common answer to the question of which best describes their current state is that they're exhausted and just running on fumes.
Yes.
And almost half, about 44% of the respondents said they're doing pretty good, but ellipsis. Sometimes we're just living in the ellipsis. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right. So that's the first responses. The second question being, what would be most helpful? And I'm assuming that's most helpful to get you out of that state that you're in, if
right.
you want to be. I'll start at the bottom again. The fewest respondents, but still 9%, said to find ways to know they're not alone. That would help. That would be most helpful. 13% are looking for ways to spark their imagination. And the same percentage are seeing the power. It would help them to see the power of their story.
Yeah.
Followed closely by, now this is the third most common answer was they're looking for ways to fill their tank. Right, so kind of running on empty.
Yes.
The answer to the first question. And 21%, what would be most helpful is to learn how to invite God into their creativity. That's the second most common. And then the top answer, which was only a little bit more than number 2, was to find the validation of their voice.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Scott.
You got it.
So, hey, I hope that all of you realize, one, you're not alone. Listen to those responses and the metrics behind each one and the number of people just in this call. And what is important to remember is those of you in this call, you're actually the ones who are really committed to soul care. Like, nobody's going to show up for a Storyteller soul care session that doesn't care about their soul care, right? So the people on here are the really committed, serious, minded about, I want to care for my soul. And yet, even in this group, you can see there's a lot of weariness, a lot of questions, and some being stuck places and doubts about voice or how to pursue what they love with God. So you're not alone, okay? You're not alone.
And I have just shared the results of the poll, so anyone who's on the Zoom link can go back to the polls and see the results.
That's good. So what I want to do now with our time, and I'm going to talk for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. And I'm honestly most excited about the Q&A. So please know that's coming. Think about a question that you'd like to ask, and we will make time for that. But what I want to talk about now are what are some practices to get us through the very things we've named, soul care practices. And I'm going to take them in the categories that I mentioned to you early on about God and as creator, the way he created. So first, I want to talk about imagination, because we see in our mind the story ideas before we actually start to write them or speak them. So your imagination, restoration and imagination, remember, have a connection. So what are ways to restore that restores your imagination? I'm going to give you a couple of ideas and thoughts. In our conference in February, we're going to go deeper into pretty much every facet of what we're talking about. Tonight, we're going to skim the surface a little for time. But with your imagination, first of all, it's really important to invite God into your imagination. Most creatives don't do this. What I mean by that is in Jeremiah 33:3, he says, "Come with me and I will show you things you've never thought of, beyond your wildest imagination, things that have not yet been." And the caveat to that is, come with me, do this together. So if we want to have ideas and an imagination that actually transcends us, that is beyond our best ability to be creative, we have to invite God into our imagination. What does that look like? Well, it's not anything complicated or some trick, that's hard to master for people. What you do is something like this: God, I give you my imagination. I want to enter into my creativity together with you. I want you to show me things I've never seen. I want you to give me thoughts I've never thought. I want you to spark story ideas in me that blow me away because I know they didn't come from me. God, will you sanctify? Will you exponentially grow my imagination? That prayer, that request is gold, because God loves to be invited in. And that's why the beginning of that verse is, come to me, or invite me in, or do this together with me. So asking for the mind and the ideas of the creator of everything, God didn't just excel at creativity, he created creativity. There was no creativity before God, right? And as creator, he decided to make us creative. And so to invite him into your imagination is it's a beautiful, and it's an exciting thing to do. So do that. Also, with your imagination, what I would encourage you to do is find time to read more for pure joy. Find authors that you love, not in your genre necessarily, could be, but what you're not trying to do is make it a work project. You're not trying to make it a research project. What are you reading for pleasure that actually ignites your imagination? I'm not asking you what movies you're watching. I'm saying, what books are you reading? Because I'm not talking to cinematographers or movie directors right now. I'm talking to storytellers and writers primarily. So what books are you reading? And it could be books from other centuries. It could be books from 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It doesn't have to be today's bestseller. One of the things I'm reading right now is the C.S. Lewis Space Trilogy. Now, I read those right out of college. I read the first two of the three, actually, not the third. And then I just moved on to other things. And for the last few decades, I see these books on my shelf and I think, man, I really want to read these again, but I'm just too busy. And they don't really relate to anything I'm writing. And so they've been decorations on a bookshelf. And a month ago, I started reading the trilogy, and now I'm in book 2, and I'm taking my time and I'm underlining and I'm taking notes, and it's a blast and I love it. And those were written over 50 years ago. And what I love about that is it's kind of been a dream of mine to get back into them. And so it's pure joy, pure joy. And what are you reading for pure joy that sparks your imagination, that transports you, that makes you feel childlike? Another thing I'm doing is I'm reading some children's series that I just have a blast. I used to read to my kids. And like one great one, if you haven't read, these are short books, few words on the page, pictures, but Mr. Putter and Tabby. Has anybody heard of that series? Look it up. There's about 20 in the series. They're paperback. But the woman who wrote them has a way with words that are phenomenal. And it just brings a childlike wonder to me. And I hadn't read them since our kids, were younger, and I was reading to them. So find those things that bring you joy and that spark your imagination. Now, the second thing I want to get into, in the order that God, kind of created, was First, there was imagination that he had. Then he spoke things into being. The speaking part is your voice. God used his voice to speak things into existence. As writers, we use our voice, and our voice is what the enemy causes us to doubt. Now, think about this. The first thing the enemy tried to do after creation in the garden was to get Adam and Eve to doubt the voice of God. I don't know if you've thought about it that way, but he was calling doubt on God's voice, and God's voice was the voice of a creator, right? And a father. And so the enemy's first attack against God is his voice. Did God really say this? Did he really speak this to you? Is his voice really trustworthy? The enemy also comes against your voice as a writer. You don't have anything to say. Nobody cares about what you have to say. Nobody wants to read your story. Is your voice really worth it? He'll try to diminish your voice, and he'll try to have you doubt God's voice. So many people today think they can't hear the voice of God. It's the same tactic the enemy used in the garden. Can you really trust God's voice? Can you even hear God's voice? And by the way, your voice, do you really think you have something worth saying? See, the enemy comes against our voice in numerous ways. And so when you start to doubt your voice, your ability as a storyteller, the best thing you can do for your soul, right, is to say, that's a lie. God has given me a unique voice to create and co-create with him unique worlds and stories. And so you have to recognize, for your soul to be taken care of, you have to recognize your voice is under attack. And what do you do to protect your voice? What do you do to honor and nurture your voice? Well, part of that is to enter into your creativity with God and know that God spoke life into you. He created you to be creative. And when you take his breath of life in you and speak with your words, you're speaking life on the page to readers. And so your voice is sacred. It's a sacred thing that God has given you that's unique from anybody else's. And so you have to believe in your voice, and you have to take time to nurture your voice and to really understand how your unique way of seeing life, the scars of your story, I'm talking about your real life story, the scars you have had, negative things happen to you against you, those all play out in the voice you have as a writer. So that voice needs to not be doubted, but it needs to be nurtured and invested in. And you have a unique way of telling stories that nobody else does. So think about this, like every day, how do you care for your voice? And one of the best ways to care for your voice is to care for your heart. And how do you care for your heart? Well, you nurture your heart, because above all else, we're told in Proverbs 4:23, your heart is to be taken care of. And why is that? Because it is the wellspring of life, right? So the wellspring of life, I believe, a lot of times flows from your heart through your voice as a storyteller. So if you don't take care of your heart and that wellspring dries up, your voice goes silent. If your heart goes numb, your voice, you really lose your voice. You don't have anything to say, and the enemy's trying to get you to lose your voice. And, God talks about how in creation, even if we're silent, the rocks will cry out, creation will cry out. In other words, God gives us a voice to use to change the atmosphere around us for good. But if we lose our voice, if we're silent, the rocks will cry out. Creation will cry out. So protect and nurture your voice by protecting and nurturing your heart. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about, the next step in this, imagining, speaking things into being with your voice, and then it's seeing that it's good. In each of the days of creation, it ends with, and God saw that it was good, right? And to see that something's good, you have to take time to look at something and really see it for what it is, know it for what it is. And as writers, we have blind spots. And when you have a blind spot, that means you're not seeing something for what it is, right? If you live in Colorado like I do, you can see Pikes Peak every day when you're new in town. And I moved here 10 years ago. Every day it was a wow factor. I'd turn the corner, the mountains would come into view, and it would leave me breathless. Well, 10 years later, I've got to admit, I don't even notice it every day. And people come here just to see Pikes Peak. And I drive by it every day and I miss it a lot of times. I have a blind spot to it because of familiarity. You're most familiar with your own writing, so you have certain blind spots. So part of soul care is seeing what you're doing and naming it as good, knowing what is good. That doesn't mean you don't need to improve your writing. It doesn't mean there's not problems. It doesn't mean, false bravado or thinking everything you do is great, but it means seeing what you're doing for what it really is. And sometimes that means knowing the improvements that need to be made, or realizing this draft is not what it needs to be. But you're seeing it for what it is, not out of fear, not out of worry, not with a blind spot. And oftentimes fear and worry create big blind spots because we don't see reality as it really is when we're fearful or when we're worried. And so how do you take time to see your writing with fresh eyes? Another good thing about seeing something so you can name it as good is knowing, wow, like I'm writing the same story over and over, or why am I actually wanting to write on this when I feel like in my life I have more experience or more passion to write on this. And so it's seeing your writing so that you can write in trueness and then know that that's good. And, when God created, he created, I've talked to some of you before about, like, when he created wildflowers, he didn't create Christian wildflowers. He created wildflowers in trueness. He created oceans, not Christian oceans. He created mountains, not Christian mountains. He created in trueness and saw that it was good. So part of that is you're not writing in formula. You're not going, well, this is a Christian fiction novel, so I have to do this and I have to do this and I can't do this and I can't do that. Well, that's formula. I mean, if you're checking off boxes of what you can and can't do, you're writing spec formula. But God didn't create in formula, and he didn't worry about trying to define everything. Like, he just let elephants be elephants. He let oceans be oceans. And because he was God and created from a trueness, well, all of those things had the glory of God, reflected the glory of God, right? And that's what your writing will do. It will reflect the glory of God if you're walking with God. But it doesn't need artificial labels and formula. And so when you see something in trueness, it takes away your blind spots and it lets you see it for what it is. And so a good thing for soul care is, God, give me the clarity to see my writing for what it is. Give me the clarity to see myself as a writer in how you designed me to be. Give me eyes to see. That's a great prayer when you don't know what else to pray. God, give me eyes to see. Give me your interpretation of my writing. Give me your interpretation of me as an author. And if you haven't done this in a while, we obsess with what other people think about our writing. That's not good. I think we can all agree with that. When you obsess about what other people think, that's not good. When God created in the creation days, I promise you, God wasn't biting his fingernails, worried what you or I would think about the ocean. God wasn't like a nervous creator of, well, I like it, but what if humanity hates it? Then what do I do? Like, God didn't do that. He was not a nervous creator, striving for validation from his creation. So when you create, the best thing you can do, if you want eyes to see, if you want to be able to see that it's good, is ask God, what is your interpretation of my writing? What's your interpretation of me as an author? What's your interpretation of my story and me as a storyteller? If you've never done that, it's really revolutionary. And God, just realize God gave you this gift of creativity. So if you're starting to hear all kind of negative things, what you may be hearing is the voice of the enemy or your own voice of doubt, because God gave you the gift of story. So I promise you, God's not going to say, well, you're not a storyteller. That's not God's voice, because he gave you the gift of story. So that's seeing your story with true eyes, taking away blind spots, asking God for how he sees it, because that's the truest interpretation of all of what you're doing as a writer. And then the fourth part, the resting. On the seventh day, God rests. God savors his creation. He celebrates it. The hardest part for a writer, I believe, is not the idea stage, the imagination stage, is not the writing stage, is not the day that the book actually comes out. It's right after that, because then we go from creating to worrying. Now, what are people going to say? Is anybody going to buy the book? How will people find out about the book? What will the Amazon rankings be? Will I make any money? Will people even know I published a book? All of those things after creation, we don't savor it. We don't rest in it. We worry and we obsess, and we check Amazon every 30 minutes to see if anybody ordered the book, or what their reviews are, or what our sales revenue is. It's super unhealthy to obsess over that. God, when he created, didn't keep looking over his shoulder on the seventh day going, maybe that thing about a giraffe with a long neck was stupid. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have made, the second day of creation shorter and the third day longer, and, all of those things. So again, look at God as our model and ask yourself, how well do you rest? How well do you restore? Do you jump from the end of a project to the beginning right again? Or do you take time to restore and do heart care, soul care, and savor? That's what God did after the most amazing creation of all. Here's an important fact. He was not tired. When it says God rest, he didn't collapse on the ground because he had burnt out. So what that means, which is really important for you and me, is in the creation process, God was not overwhelmed. He wasn't drinking 5 pots of coffee, and loading up with caffeine and jittery and nervous and irritable. He was a joyful creator who at the end savored creation. He didn't collapse and need a week to curl up in a fetal position, and because he was so burnt out. We don't need to be that way either. Now, I've named a lot of different things, and I hope those are helpful. But what I want to just say is, when you create with God through the whole process, because that was one of the big things you guys flagged, creating with God is an active, intimate process. What I'm not saying is just say a prayer at the beginning and say, God, be with me. That's a nice prayer. It doesn't really do a whole lot, because then if you go back to writing on your own, you're just writing by yourself again. When you create with God, God is right there with you. There should be a playfulness to it. There should be you typing and then hearing God kind of go, no, not that, this, and gives you an idea, and then takes the chapter in another way, and then encourages you to try something. Or you hear a soundtrack, and that soundtrack reminds you of a scene when you were a girl, and that all of a sudden becomes part of the story. Or God says, pause, get up, walk around the block. I just want to show you or tell you something. And you get up and you leave the keyboard, and you don't go, but I need to hit a word count, God. You go, okay, you're inviting me to get up and walk. I'm in. I'm walking with you. I would rather have an hour or two of my writing time with God where he leads me than writing more words in my own strength. So it's an interactive, joyful, playful, imaginative process with God. When I'm writing stories, one of the playful things I will do is I'll write a chapter, like in the story of With, it's an allegory. Well, as I was writing through it, I would start to hit a dead end at the end of a chapter where it was a cliffhanger. And I would then try to rewrite it because I wasn't sure how to get the protagonist out of it. And God would say, write the character, your protagonist, in the biggest dilemma you can, where you have no idea what's going to happen. And then I'll show you what to do. And as a writer, I was like, yeah, but I don't know what to do. And he was like, right. Just like in life, you have no idea what to do when you face an impossible mountain. And I move mountains and I do the impossible. I make the impossible possible. So write your stories not to your limitation, but write them to the unlimited potential of me as your co-storyteller. And it was the most fun way to write. It was like, God, show me the scenes ahead of time. Show me a picture of what you may want in this story, in this novel. And, C.S. Lewis talks about the first scene he saw when he was writing Narnia was actually the fawn-like character with a present under a lamppost in the snow. It wasn't Aslan. It wasn't a fully fleshed out, manuscript for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was that scene, that image, that picture. And then C.S. Lewis had to step into story with God. So when you actively create with God, it's not you and your best strength giving your best. That's nice. But what you really want is you and God co-creating together in a dance where you don't feel the stress that it's all up to you. You don't rely on formula because you don't need formula. You've got God. You've got the creator of the universe. So it's a very active, intimate process. The story of With goes into more of what that looks like. But for tonight, I'm just naming, you never have to create alone again when you co-create with God. And it's the most amazing thing. And when you finish the book, the pressure's off you because you realize I didn't come up with a lot of this anyway, God did. So I'm not looking for validation from other people. I'm kind of in awe of what God created and I got to be a part of. So it's both humbling and inspiring and encouraging and mysterious and wild. And it's the very best place to be as a storyteller. The last thing I would say is to remember your dreams and then dream bigger. The world tells us to decrease our dreams. And we think to protect our soul and our heart, we have to downsize our dreams. Because if we dream too big, we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. But actually, God says, dream bigger and release the pressure that it's all up to you to achieve the dreams. So it's counterintuitive. It's dream bigger, but know that there's no striving to get to those dreams. Dream bigger with God and watch him do the impossible. There's a verse that I love, Ephesians 3:20, and let me read it to you. Never doubt God's mighty power to work in you and accomplish all this. He will achieve infinitely more than your greatest request, your most unbelievable dream, and exceed your wildest imagination. He will outdo them all, for his miraculous power constantly energizes you. Now, that's one translation. It's a thought for thought translation. It's the Passion Translation. But just listen to the thought in it. Don't doubt God's mighty power, right? If you want to take care of your soul, quit doubting God and his power. And not just power, but power to work in you. He will achieve infinitely more than your greatest request, your most unbelievable dream, and exceed your wildest imagination. He'll outdo them all with his power, not your power, his power, and his power will constantly energize you. So if you're feeling worn out, tired, overwhelmed, you need, 2 pots of coffee to kind of keep going. Well, that's you trying to energize yourself. But God is going to give you the power to energize you when you co-create with him. And it is more like a dance than it is like anything else, because you're not sure where your part ends and his begins, or his begins and your part ends. It's like when you're in a dance, the two become one. And that union in your creativity will be huge for your soul. I'm going to stop there so we can go into some Q&A, but I hope some of these thoughts will help you as you sit down to write and to just look at your life as an author and as a storyteller and go, no great art was ever created without great heart. And I can't have great heart if I don't care for my soul. So soul care comes before word count. Soul care comes before cranking it out. Soul care comes before anything in the story I'm writing, the story I'm living has to come first, because you can't tell a better story than the one you're living. And if you're living, if that part of your world is in disarray, then you're not going to create a great story, because you're not even knowing how to live a great story, right? So your own life and soul care have to come first. And as your heart and soul go, so goes the story. And your characters can't risk more or be more brave or be more loving or be more understanding of who God is than you are. How could they? You're writing them. So if you may need to risk more, you may need to live more, you may need to love more before you can actually write more. Because as you do, you discover more about God and about love and about the people around you and about how life works. And then your stories actually take on a new life, one not based on formula, but based on you having fully immersed yourself in a life worth living. So take care of your soul. It matters for your story, but more than that, it matters for your life. Now, I'm going to quit talking and let's go to some questions.
And now that was fantastic, Alan. Thank you so much. While you guys, I'm going to invite everyone to put questions into the chat. We'll start seeing some of those questions up. If you don't mind, Alan, before while we're letting people kind of populate some of those questions, I just want to let people know some of the ways that they can fill their tanks, right? Everything that we're doing at Realm Makers to support everything that you've been talking about. I would highly recommend folks consider joining us at the retreat in February 20th to the 23rd. Just go to retreat.realmmakers.com. Check out all the details about this year's Winter Creativity Summit in person in Colorado Springs with Allen Arnold. Also, everything is going to be live streamed. And then, of course, this summer, we've got Realm Makers, our 10th annual conference, July 21st to 23rd. Complete details at conference.realmmakers.com. And those of you who were there last year, Allen Arnold was there with us along with Frank Peretti. And you might know this, but if it wasn't for Allen Arnold, Frank Peretti wouldn't have been there. And once he was done, I talked to him afterwards, and he's pretty much said, you know what, I'm not doing any more events. I think our event might have been the last one.
But not because he didn't like it, just because
no. It's just like he's just ready to move on and just keep playing his guitar and enjoying life up there in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm assuming we've got some questions now that have been accumulating here. Can you see those, Alan? Do you want to just look and answer them as you see them? You want to bring some up to you?
Why don't you bring up the ones, Scott, that you think are most relevant?
Sure. Well, Alan, what are some of the ways, or maybe Sarah, we can just unmute Sarah. So Sarah D, you've got a question there. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Sarah, do you want to ask Alan your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Alan. Good to see you again.
Sarah. Good to see you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what are some of the ways that you feed your soul personally?
Yeah, great question, Sarah. So some of the ways, if you guys can, I don't know if you can see me right now or if I'm on screen, but behind me is a painting I love of an ocean. And one of the reasons I have that up in my office is because I don't live near the beach, but the ocean gives me great joy. So I have this painting of the ocean wave that I love and all the blue colors. And that gives me life. I'm a big fan of Superman. Well, you can see behind me here. I don't know if you can see this, but here's the Superman bust. It's just fun and it just brings me life. And so it's playful, and I have that there. I surround myself with music and imagery and colors that bring me life. Those are simple things. And God created the ocean. So if I love a painting of the ocean, I don't just love the water, I love the creator of the ocean, right? And the color blue and green, and I love the way in the ocean those colors come out. And so I love flame, I love fire. So I keep a candle going in my office. It's the kind of things that, like, I think what's important is to strip away the religious, God is the least religious person you'll ever meet, right? He's the most creative and the least religious. We make religion. God invites us into relationship. So I find the things that God has created that bring me life, and I try to surround myself with those things. And when I do, and I have a good book, and I'm in a place that the sensory elements are making me come alive, speaking to my heart, that's one way I nurture my heart. So that's just a simple, quick answer.
Awesome.
Surround yourself with things that bring you life. The color shirt you're wearing, the pen in your hand, the journal, the candle, the music that you play on the way to work instead of the news. All of those things make a difference.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Now, Sarah, Laura Johnson, you had a couple questions. If you want to pick one of those and ask Allen.
Sure. So I don't know which one to pick. I'll just go with my first one. So what everything that you're talking about tonight and what you're going to be talking about in the Winter Creativity Summit, like what made that important to you? How did that all kind of start and come together, and why you thought it was an important message to share?
Yeah, really good question. Well, for me, I was a publisher for a decade and was a fiction publisher for over 500 novels. And what I saw during that time was really creative people who loved God and were creating novels from a Christian worldview. If they didn't take care of their souls as a writer or storyteller, they didn't go the distance. Like, they were super talented, at the top of their game, good advances, a good publishing team around them, and they were very creative, but yet after 2-3 novels, some of them would burn out, or a decade later, they weren't writing. And not all of them, but a lot there were reasons. And I think the reasons were, this world keeps asking for more and more and more. And it's more chaotic at the same time, and there's more demands. And if you really don't nurture your heart and soul, and you start to coast on formula or past success, or you start to feel the pressure of having to come up with the next big idea, those things will make your soul weary, and those things will ultimately hurt creativity. And so I realized my biggest goal in life, even though I'm no longer a publisher, is to go after the hearts of storytellers and creatives and nurture their hearts, because that really is the wellspring of their creativity. And so one of the things I see at writers' conferences, a hyper focus on craft and strategy and social media and marketing and promotion, like, those things are needed. So I'm not against those things. You need to be really good at your craft. But when soul care and the foundation isn't how to co-create with God, and there's no emphasis on soul care, I just look at that and I go, it's kind of like having a car and talking about all the accessories and the color of paint, but you're only filling up the tank with half a tank of gas, and you're asking somebody to go across the country. They're going to run out of gas. Doesn't matter how good the car looks. Doesn't matter what the model of the car is. You're going to run out of gas and be on the side of the road. And so soul care for storytellers, I don't want anyone here running out of gas and running on empty, because at that point, your story collapses because you don't have it in you to finish it or to do it well. And so when we take care of our soul as creatives, as storytellers in unique ways, then we thrive, and then our stories have an eternal spark. So that's why. Thank you.
All right. Ted Atchley, I'll ask you to unmute.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Hey, Ted.
Hey, Alan, good to see you again, sir.
You too, man.
Hey, my question is about formula and how that differs from things like 3-act structure and genre expectations and things that we use to kind of structure our stories but not become formulaic, but still follow that good story theory that's been developed over the years.
Right. Great question. I think there are guidelines or there are directional things that have proven helpful and popular. And so to me, those are different than formula. So for instance, it's the difference in this, me saying, hey, Ted, you and I are going to go to Florida. Okay, well, that's not formulaic, and the journey will not be formulaic. But if we said, well, the only way we ever travel is by plane, and the only airline we ever take is Southwest, and the only hotel we ever stay in is this, and the only part of the beach we ever see is this, that's formula, right? But saying, let's go to Florida and do a road trip together isn't formulaic. It's just naming a destination and knowing there are some things that'll help us get there. But I will say this, the 3-act, structure, every romance novel has to have these beats in it. I go against the grain and I say BS on that. Like, was that carved in, did God, with the 10 Commandments, did he somehow carve story structure in stone? And, like, just because humanity has gravitated to do things a certain way isn't the only way. Like, if an angel came to earth and told a story, I guarantee you the angel wouldn't go, well, I have to do this in 3 acts, right? So, because that's the law of the universe. And so this is the only way I can really deliver this. Like, we have our traditions, we have our expectations, but I would even say then the stories we remember most are actually ones that feel free to break man-made rules, because they're man-made rules. Like, and sometimes just because a story works well with man-made rules doesn't mean we have to follow them every time. So that's what I would say to that, is freedom in how you create your story, and at the same time, not avoiding things that are just common sense, like part of the hero's journey. Like, sure, like, you can follow that in really creative ways, but at the same time, the hero's journey isn't the DNA of the universe. Like, we can do our own mode of story without following those beats every time. So I go against the grain a little bit on that, but I think God isn't rigid and formulaic. And I think anytime we start to go, it's got to be done this way, a flag ought to come up and go, why? Well, because that's what publishers expect. Well, then don't publish with them. Like, I mean, why are publishers saying that? Just because they know it's worked in the past. But as soon as somebody breaks the rules, they'll be asking people to do that new thing. And that new thing would have never happened if somebody didn't go around them. So I think there ought to be freedom to be fresh and original. And yeah, use what works in new ways when you want to use what's worked before. Because there are only so many types of stories, but the way we tell them can forever be fresh.
The way you elaborated towards the end, you ended up answering one of the other questions that Carrie Williams had asked. So,
I did that on purpose.
Yes. So Carrie, I won't bring you on to ask your question since it just got answered. But Timothy and Donnie both had a similar question as far as writing, having multiple stories going at the same time. Timothy, if you're unmuted, do you want to go ahead and ask that question? I'm looking for your face on here to ask you to unmute, but are you there, Timothy? You had a question there.
Oh, thanks. Now, Alan had a question on that. I'd wondered, by having too many story ideas, if that's is leading you away from the story you should write. That's kind of like the squirrel syndrome, to where you keep getting distracted instead of focusing on a single story. Or if you had any ideas on that.
Yes, I think one of the biggest Achilles heels of a creative is too many good ideas and trying to dabble in all of them. That doesn't mean you don't ever follow up with them, but I do believe there's power in focus. And so I believe there really is a time to go, out of all the ideas, this is the one I'm committing to, and I'm going to stay with it until I give birth to it. Because I've worked as a coach. I coach a lot of creatives. So I'll do hourly Zoom calls, phone calls, one-on-one meetings. And when I do those, some of the time, really talented people a year later are still juggling multiple ideas. And when we'll meet the next time, they'll say, oh, look, yeah, no, I was working on that, but I've got this really cool idea. I was watching this TV show and now I've thought of this. And what if I did this? And the next time it's, well, I heard this song and it made me think. And it's like, you're super creative and your mind is always going. That's good, but you also have nothing to show for it. And so there comes a time to commit to an idea and see it through to completion, and then go to the next idea. But otherwise, you can take years of kind of just orbiting around 100 different shiny objects, and the enemy, if all the enemy has to do for your story never to be born is to keep distracting you with shiny objects and what if ideas, then he's won. And so I do think, write those things in a journal, set them aside, and keep on the one thing. And if you're not interested in the one thing, quit the one thing and start the next thing. But find something that you can take to completion and give birth to, and then go to the next big idea. So yeah, I think it is distracting to have 2-3 things going simultaneously, if it means it takes forever to get any one of those to the finish line.
Now, I thought we'd not pause so much, but we were talking before about some of the fun gifts that'll be in the gift package for at the retreat. I thought I would show perhaps the concept for the bookmarks that are being created. Just for the conference, I'll send myself away. So this image here are, we're gonna have some custom made wooden bookmarks. And that little image of Pikes Peak at the top is gonna be carved out of the wood. So it's gonna be kind of fun, but different people will get ones with different quotes here, all from Allen. But that's just one of the several little gifts that'll be a part of the Real Makers Creativity Summit. If you're attending online, you would just need to purchase the $40 gift package, because it's not automatically included in the online cost. It is if you're attending in person. But just thought I'd show you guys that pretty quick. Now, Nathan Peterson, you had a question. You want to go ahead and unmute? I'll ask you to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thank you too, Alan. It's great to finally see you.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stood out is you talked about how the biggest story that we're going to be doing is like our own lives, right? And it just kind of made me wonder, have you gone through seasons where you felt like you couldn't be creative and like you just had a 10th life? And have you seen that in other writers? And
oh yeah,
where are some signposts of like, maybe I do need to take a step back and like not write for a while almost?
I think the biggest signposts, Nathan, are, and I have seen it in a lot of writers, and I have seen it in myself. And what I find is when I'm not taking care of myself, my ideas ultimately dead end or dry up or less than, because I want that wellspring of creativity, that river of creativity to flow through me, which is God. And when I'm trying to do things in my own strength, I'm burning the candle at both ends. Then what I find is I'm more irritable. I'm I'm not taking care of myself. And so my stories are not being well taken care of. My ideas and imagination are not. And that's why I say, when you see people when you meet an author and they look really unhealthy because they are sitting in a chair all day long and they don't get out in the sun and they don't breathe fresh air and they don't exercise and they don't eat and drink things that are healthy for them, and they're at their laptop all day long, I go, man, it's only a matter of time, because you are the vessel things are coming through. And if you're not taking care of your body and soul and heart and mind, and you're just living life through keystrokes, like, I'm not trying to be rude, and I've been in this trap myself, but like, you're the creator of a world. I don't want to live on your world. If that's the creator of the world and they never get outside and they're fearful, or they're being consumed by envy or worry, like, I don't want to live on that world for 300 pages. I don't want to live in that story because it's an unhealthy creator. And so whether that's unhealthy physically, mentally, on a soul level, their thoughts, where their thoughts are going, if they're highly addicted to things, then I don't want to take the journey with them, even if they're really creative in some ways. And that's why I don't like to watch a lot of shows and movies and read a lot of books from creatives who are living very destructive lives, because I think I don't want to spend 300 pages with that person. I wouldn't go on a road trip with that person. The creator, why would I spend 300 pages in their mind? And so I do think those are some signs. Like, live a good life, live a life that's full of soul care and that's full of laughter. And what's your relationship with your spouse and your kids and your best friends? Do you have best friends? Do you have any friends? Real friends, not social media friends, but do you have real friends who go through life and call you on things? And, like, the signs of a healthy life are people that live well with others and then can create well. And so to me, when I see a writer not doing those things, it's just, sometimes it's momentary, but if it's a longer term thing, the stories are going to implode because the writer is imploding, are numb, are so exhausted, they're not thinking straight. So yeah, I do think there's a time to go. I need to live more and then write more. And one thing, this is not just for Nathan, but for everybody. Great question, Nathan, by the way. But one thing, and great background. One thing I was going to just offer everybody is, on my website, you can sign up for something called Daily Thoughts on God and Creativity. It's free. It's a short, like, couple of paragraphs a day, Monday through Friday, that I have created. And I want creatives to just spend time in, because that's one way for soul care, is to just take 30 seconds or a minute and read something about God and creativity Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, something that takes you maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And so if you're not signed up for that, withallen.com is my website, withallen.com. You can sign up on the bottom of the homepage for that. And I think it'll be just a little bit of a restorative practice that you can easily do. And I think you'd like it. So I just want to offer that as a practical way to kind of stay in what we're talking about here tonight on a daily basis.
And just to add on to that, folks who last year participated in Unleash Your Story with Allen, and folks who participate next month in the Winter Creativity Summit, there's also a special event in the Realm Sphere where we spend time much longer than just the event. in community there in the realm sphere. So in a place where it's only the attendees of the event.
Yeah, like Scott, I'll for those who weren't in that last year, don't know, probably every week or other week, I'll share a few thoughts and get some responses. And I see some of you on here who respond, and it's just a way to stay in touch, because my goal isn't just to give a presentation, but it's to be on a journey with all of you, because I'm on the journey too, of how do we live life more intimately with God in our dreams and creativity and gifting. And so I would love, even after this Winter Creativity Summit, for those in it, like we'll have our own group through the Realm Sphere, and it's a way for you to reach out to me to reach out to you guys, to have some conversation, because I want you to be creative for the long haul. I don't want you to burn bright and then burn out. And the way we do that is together as creative bohemians who love God and who practice soul care on a regular basis, not just telling more stories, but telling more stories from a soul that's filled with God.
Thank you. Now there are more questions kind of keep coming in. I'm not sure how much more time we have here.
You want to take maybe two more, and we'll let everybody go?
Sure. Let's see. Now I know that Andrew Swearingen had a comment. I wasn't sure if there was a question buried in there. Andrew, it didn't have a question mark at the end, but you were just kind of adding your couple cents there. You were talking about the 3-act structure, the hero's journey.
Oh no, that was just kind of me tossing in my own 2 cents in regards to rigidity of the 3-act structure and kind of its moldability and stuff like that. So that wasn't a specific question. No.
Got it.
Can I ask a question, Scott?
Yes, Lisa.
So it was something, I don't remember who posted it earlier, but they made the comment, and it's kind of echoes Carrie's post down here, that when writing becomes your full-time job, I guess it takes the fun out of the hobby portion of it. And so not just with writing, but with everything, whether you're a full-time writer or you work full-time and you're trying to write on the side, or just anything, like we need soul care day to day. So I don't know if my question is regarding balance, or just, would soul care change any if it wasn't just writing related soul care, if it was like job related soul care? How do you care for your soul if you're something other than a writer, or if writing becomes your job and that drains you?
Yeah, well, I that's a great question. I think God makes us all unique, and I think there are unique ways that we can care for our soul. And so there are some basics for sure. We should be in the Word. We should read Scripture. We should gather as a community with fellow believers. We should talk to God and have conversation through prayer. Like, there are the basics, but I think as creative storytellers and other artists, there are specific things you can do that people in your family or people who are your friends it may not bring them much life at all. I joined a local group of artisans and this is very current, like literally the first meeting they meet monthly that I was part of was last night. So this is brand new. And some of the people there are musicians, and some are storytellers, and the guy I sat next to is a metal worker who, like a silversmith who creates, through metal, and there's painters and artists. And I gathered that group, and they had 2 speakers last night. One talked about why I love cinema, great cinema, and was showing like clips from movies from the 30s and 40s and 60s and all through the history of film. And the other person was talking about why I write memoirs. Now, most of my friends would have rather wanted to go see like paint dry on a wall than do what I just did. That would not interest them at all. A lot of the people my neighbors and who I see on a daily basis, I was fascinated. It was soul care for me. I didn't lead it. I didn't ask a few questions, but I was a member in a community of people that celebrate and love art. That's soul care for me. It looks very different for somebody who maybe is a mountain climber or who is a, marathon runner or who is fascinated by whatever. And so I do think there are ways to care for your soul that are unique and that tie to your creativity as a storyteller. Reading books with great story, that doesn't nurture everybody's heart. It does mine and yours. And so that's where I think as God makes us unique, it's like, God, what does my soul need right now? You have made me love story. You have given me the gift of telling story. Part of the ways my soul will be restored is as a storyteller. That's not your primary identity. Your primary identity is a daughter of God, son of God. But you are a storyteller, and God will nurture you in the ways of storytelling, in the ways of art, in the ways of creativity. You'll tear up in a scene from a Star Wars, episode, or and I'm looking at you, Ted, but you'll tear up at that where the person with you may be like, what is the big deal? Like it's like, I don't get it. It's a desert and it's a Yoda figure and like, what the heck's going on? But so you have to nurture your heart in ways that God made you. And that will be unique as a storyteller. And there are some basics that we all do. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I suffer on and on with anxiety and depression, and my mom is in hospice. And so last year was a really rough year, and I went to counseling. And it is very much what the counselor told me, especially as a mom, everything I do is for someone else. And so she was like, every day, find something to do that brings you pleasure. And so that's the same thing that you're saying. It's I need to take time to care for myself while I'm caring for others, or I do just completely run out. So
yeah. And Lisa, sometimes that's so true. And sometimes the lie that we tell ourselves is there's just not time. Sometimes there's just not time to, like, that's a luxury that I don't have time for. But what I have found, the more I'm in this, is we actually do have time, because the time only may take a minute or two sometimes to go outside and smell a flower, to let the cool air wash over your face. Around Christmas time, we live in a neighborhood, and across the street, the intersection, are these beautiful blue lights that they have lined hundreds of trees with. And I drive by it every day on the way home. And for 10 years, we've lived in this house that I'm in, and I have never driven through that neighborhood. I always pass it and go, that is so cool. But I've never taken the time, because I'm always I feel like in a hurry to get somewhere. And this year, for the first time, I said, that's crazy. And so I went out of my way to find the back neighborhood, roads to get to this addition that has all these trees. And I just parked and basked in the blue light and in those trees. And it took an extra 10 minutes, and I came home a different man. And, it's one little thing. But what I'm naming is, what are those one little things we can do every day where we go, God, I sense your presence. I love you. And I'm doing something that brings my soul joy or lets me breathe. And I'm not just doing it to be better for others. I'm doing it because it brings me joy to do it with you, God. So simple little things. Don't make it complicated. When I pick a Sharpie, my favorite colors are blue and green. I buy blue and green Sharpies. I don't buy yellow Sharpies or highlighters. So what is it that brings you joy? And just incorporate those into your day. Don't make it a formula, but just find time for the simple things.
that's awesome. Thank you. You're muted, Scott. Do I need to ask you to unmute?
Oh, I was muted.
Yes.
Rachel's unmuted though. So go ahead, Rachel.
Well, she doesn't know what you said because you're muted.
Oh, well, I messaged her too, but I don't
Oh,
hear
okay.
her. It looks like you're unmuted, Rachel, but I'm not hearing you. So maybe there's a microphone issue there. If we don't get that resolved, I'll ask your question.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so my question is sort of related to what Lisa's question was, I think a little bit, but maybe more specific to, the publishing process. I'm wondering if you have advice for someone struggling. I'm in the middle of trying to find an agent right now for a middle grade novel. I'm pursuing traditional publishing, but I've just been getting rejection after rejection. And, as someone this is kind of the first time I've kind of moved into the publishing realm. I've been focusing on craft for most of my life so far. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on a healthy way to pursue that process and how to handle the rejections that you get. Because I think some of what you were saying to Lisa can apply, but if there's any specifics to that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I want to encourage you to hang in there, because realize a rejection of your art story, in this case, may mean the agent just doesn't get it. Like it doesn't mean we talked earlier tonight about seeing things clearly, seeing things for what they were. Sometimes agents, they're human, they're distracted, they have their own biases, they have their own fears of trying to make a living at what they do. And so they don't see things clearly, or it's just not for them. And I remember there was an agent when I first wrote the story of With, that is a really respected, well-known Christian agent in the Christian publishing industry. And the agent looked at it, and I asked the agent what they thought. I'm being careful here not to say female or male pronouns, but they looked at it, and I said, "What did you think?" And they said, "Well, I threw it across the room because it made me so mad, and I don't want to read anymore." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, that's fine. I'm talking to several agents," and the agent was like, No, I'll represent it. I think it'll sell. I just don't like it." And I said, "Well, with all respect, I don't want anybody being my agent who doesn't get the story, and the agent couldn't understand that, because they were like, it's just business. Like, I don't have to like it." And I was like, well, actually, it is essential for me that the person who's going to represent it would like it. And so we can have agents sometimes that don't understand, they don't get it. It's not personal, but it also isn't a sign that you need to give up or change or anything else. So I think the balance in that is, don't let an agent's rejection crush you. And at the same time, try to learn why they are saying no. And some agents won't tell you why, and some will. But I think it's really helpful for an agent to go, "Well, I thought it was too long," or "I thought you didn't have a theme that resonated," or "I thought the protagonist wasn't believable," or whatever it is. Like, there's ways to learn and grow your craft. And there's other times you go, "They just didn't get it, and I'm not changing anything. Because I really believe in this. And if I have to self-publish it, I'll self-publish it, before I make that trade." And so I want to encourage your heart that a rejection of your art doesn't mean it's not worthy. It means perhaps they didn't get it. Perhaps they're not the right one that God wanted to represent it. And so God in his kindness closed that door. It doesn't feel good when a door closes, but it actually may be the very best thing to get you to the right agent. And so try to learn what you can when an agent says no. And what I think is really helpful is find books that are like yours and look who the agent is in those books, whether it's from the author's website or the acknowledgement page or the copyright page. Find out who the agent are on books that you think are similar enough to yours that agent who liked that book might like your book. And there's a chance that it may resonate with them because they've already said they like that kind of book, that kind of writing. And a lot of people don't do that, but it's far better to do that than just kind of look for big agents or respected agents. Look for the agents who have said yes to those kind of projects. And even you could take it one step further and ask some of those authors, how is that working with the agent? And if it's an author that will respond and be honest, they may go, I wouldn't sign with them again if I had the chance, or I really love working with them. So the more you can find people with similar taste, similar likes, who have said yes to similar projects, the more you're likely to find a like-minded person, and then they can help you shape it or tell you what they like or don't like about it. And it may make more sense because they are at least on the same page with you.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, it is quite late, especially for those of us here that are still at work. I'm actually I'm actually still at Bookish because I just closed the gate, and then this is where I am right now. If I were in this picture, I'd be all the way at the end. But so glad to have you, Allen, here to give us a little care for all our authors' souls. And we had about 65, almost 70 people here at the event, either between Zoom and YouTube. And that's fantastic. Thank you guys so much for participating. And we'd encourage you to take advantage of all the events we do at Realm Makers. We're really looking forward to the Winter Creativity Summit. Check out all the details at retreat.realmmakers.com. Go to Allen's website at withallen.com. Sign up for his weekly encouragement. But if you're in this special event with Realm Makers, you'll be in community with Allen and everyone who attends those special events together.
Yeah, and I just want to close my part, Scott, by saying if this resonated with you tonight, this is the equivalent of going to the beach and dipping your toe in the water at the ocean's edge. And the retreat is going to be like diving deep into the ocean and a full immersion into not only what we talked about tonight, but a lot of things to think about in terms of the industry and about writing and about story and about God and creation and creativity. And so we touched on maybe 3-4% of even some of the topics. So please try to be part of it, either through virtual or in person. In person, if you can. I know we have limited spaces for that, but I really think it's the kind of event that a decade from now, you'll look back at and go, that was a milestone for making me into the kind of writer that can tell the kind of stories that I've always dreamed of. So I really hope to see you there.
We're going to be so far away from the ocean. I think the only thing we might be able to do that's comparable is sit in the outdoor jacuzzi and then jump into a snowbank or something, and then just go back and forth.
That'll work. Hey.
All right. Thank you very much, Allen.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. And God bless. Hope to see you again here on the live stream.
Thanks. Have a good night.